All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, all you magnificent melonheads of the world. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Today is February 26th, 2025. Wow, February is almost over already. That's going fast. Top story this morning is Supermicro Computer. They filed their late financials last night with several minutes left on the clock, and just a hair under 7 months late, they actually filed their 10K. And of course, the stock is ripping higher this morning. Why? Because all the market needed to see was the number and letter 10K, and it ripped higher. Nobody actually read the report, because if they read the report, if they actually read what was in that financial statement, they would be running for the hills. First and foremost, the most important thing, what the market cares about, the only thing the market cares about, is that BDO signed off on their financials without any restatement. I found that quite shocking, to be honest with you, but there it is. BDO signed off on it. Now, from there, it gets really interesting. First of all, shortly after signing off on the financial statements, BDO says that they are expressing an adverse opinion over the internal controls over financial reporting. So on one hand, BDO is saying, yeah, everything these guys said is right. And then on the other hand, they're saying there is no procedures in place to make sure these guys aren't lying. And even if they had it, they weren't following it. So how do those two things occupy the same report? That's an excellent question. I don't understand it. It's not unheard of, but it's pretty rare. Let's see. Also, SMCI said the same thing. The company said, we have identified adverse controls over internal reporting. Gee, you think? The company included about 2 pages worth of disclaimers about the conflict of interest involving CompuWare and AbleCom, basically copy and pasted half of the Hindenburg Research short report and put it right into their 10K after swearing up and down in the media for the last 6 months that the Hindenburg report was false. They basically copied the whole Hindenburg report into their 10K. Found that kind of interesting. And again, BDO signed off on it. They mentioned that they had no segregation of duties and that could create conflict of interest over how their financials reporting. They had no control over the completeness or accuracy of financial statements that were being made. They had no controls over the entry of manual journal entries. Basically, anybody could go into their system and change their financials. They said all of these things could have led to material misstatements of their financials. They said that this was striking, like amazing. They have not remedied any of these weaknesses. They explicitly stated all of these things basically create the condition where fraud could have happened. The auditor says we don't trust them. Then the auditor signs off on them and they're like, oh, by the way, we haven't fixed anything. Honestly, this 10K read to me as I was reading this, I was getting the impression of like a pharmaceutical commercial, right? It's like grandma is skipping in the field with a picnic basket and her grandchildren talking about how her life is so well, wearing very bright colored clothing, of course, on a sunny day. And then there's like 45 seconds of some guy saying side effects include death, dismemberment, horrible disfigurement, and all this other stuff. Like, we dare you to take this medicine. That's kind of what I got from this 10K. But you know what? Nobody reads these things. Nobody reads these things. I can tell you the market's like, okay, we see SMCI, we see 10K next to it, bid up the stock 23%. It is abundantly clear to me that the private sector, that the safeguards that the industry has put in its place will not police what Supermicro is doing. They just won't do it. I mean, BDO, they've got an 86% efficiency rate in their audits at BDO. That's according to the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. The average of the big 4 accounting firms is 26% efficiency rate. BDO's is 86, almost 3.5 times the size. It's a chop shop. It's a rubber stamp shop, and they did what they were hired to do. They blessed it off. The market didn't care what was in the report. They bid the stock up. So that leaves the DOJ probe and the SEC probe as hanging over Supermicro's head. If they don't find anything, then this bubble will continue to inflate. The industry will not police itself. Also going on this morning, the House has passed their budget framework. I say budget framework because it's not a budget. I'm not really sure what it really is. But here's what it does. It passed last night by 2 votes. One Republican did not. He voted against it, Thomas Massie. Every other Republican voted for it. It extends the 2017 Trump tax cuts. That's the big thing. They're saying $4.5 trillion of tax cuts. It basically leaves the tax code the way it is right now. There's some minor changes to it, but the big thing is it extends the 2017 tax cuts. It also creates $300 billion of new defense spending. Where the hell did that come from? What? Remember earlier this week when we were talking about how Pete Hegseth was like, Pentagon, prepare for 8% cuts to defense spending for the next, I think it was like over the next 10 years, 8% each year. It might have been 8% a year for 5 years. I forget the specifics. But what's the point of doing that if a week later Congress is going to jack up your defense spending by $300 billion? That's going to wipe out all of the savings from those defense cuts that Pete Hegseth was talking about. Also in this budget framework, again, this is the Republican bill, $2 trillion deficit in 2025. Wow. Well, Republicans, remember when we all pretended to care about deficits back when Joe Biden was president? That didn't last so long. By the way, I voted for the guy, all right? I mean, I'm Republican, small r. I'm conservative, but I don't toe party lines, you may have noticed. And I speak my mind when I see BS. This bill is BS. All they're doing is increasing spending like we knew they were going to do. They talk a big game during election season, then they get into power and they do the same damn thing over and over again. The deficit in this bill is projected to hit $50 trillion by 2032, and they do nothing to even slow it down. Now, they're claiming they've got a goal of $2 trillion in spending cuts, but you know how they do it? How they created their $2 trillion in savings is they basically assign a committee a number and they say, go find the cuts. Congress didn't cut any spending. They'll say, hey, House Committee on blubbity, go find me $800 billion in savings over the next 10 years. And then they can write in the bill, see, we saved $800 billion. They didn't identify what programs they're going to cut, by how much, or by when it was going to happen. They're just saying, nope, we gave the homework to the committee to go ahead and cut that spending. It's an empty promise. Those spending cuts will never happen. Guys, this is why I've always been very skeptical. This is why I've been saying inflation is going to come back. I had high hopes for Doge, and look, all these programs, it's been great. There's been a lot of really hysterical headlines about, like $50 million in condoms for Mozambique and, an LGBTQIA plus ABZ XYZ comic strip in Belize. Here's $600,000 to create that. And I'm glad we're cutting these silly programs. But what is the point of all of this silly headlines and the hyperventilating about 6- and 7-figure cuts here and there if we're going to go blow $2 trillion while ignoring all of the big programs that are really causing this deficit? Guys, this is just silly politics, and it's more of the same. And this problem's not going to get any better as long as they keep doing this. You ran on spending cuts. Some spending cuts are unpopular. Yes, there are going to be sob stories on MSNBC about all the people you're hurting with your spending cuts. Take it. That's what you ran on. That's what you promised to do. That's what people voted you in the office to do. Cut the damn spending. But they won't do it. They just won't. Also going on this morning, we've got China is now getting ready for some bank bailouts. 400 billion yuan of fresh capital injected into the banking system. That's about $55 billion, courtesy of the issuance of some new sovereign bonds. China is slowly bailing out their banking system because of the massive amount of losses caused by their commercial real estate blow up and their residential real estate blow up going on. Nothing new there in China. We've been seeing that coming for a while. We also got earnings from Lowe's, and it was very much like Home Depot's earnings, although not quite as good. Comps at Lowe's were up by 0.2% in the last quarter, barely positive, thanks in no small part to Hurricanes Helene and Milton, thus ending 8 consecutive quarters of negative comparable store sales growth at Lowe's. Much like Home Depot, I think this is a one-off, and it's not really going to translate into any big numbers for Lowe's in the future. The housing market remains frozen in place. Next to no transactions means limited spending on home improvement. We got a lot to talk about. Once again, why don't we shrink my big melon of a head and let's see what's going on in the markets this morning. Also, guys, worth pointing out, we got NVIDIA earnings after the bell today, and I'm sure they're going to be amazing. The big question is DeepSeek. My gut tells me DeepSeek won't make a dent in these numbers. It's just too soon after the announcement. But right now, the S&P is 24 points to the upside, about 0.4% higher ahead of the open. The Dow, meanwhile, is up 73 points or 0.17% higher. Not a lot of movement in stocks this morning. The NASDAQ, however, is a lot higher, 113 points, a 0.5%, although giving up some of those gains in the last couple of minutes here. Meanwhile, the DXY is up 28 basis points, 106.57. We got a slightly higher dollar this morning. Let's look over at the bond market. We have got the 30-year Treasury is at 4.549. That's down almost 1 basis point here. Not a lot of movement in bonds this morning. The 10-year, 4.299, down a fraction of 1 point. The 2 years at 4.119. That's up about 2 points and change. And the 1 month is at 4.294. Still have the 10-year is just a little bit higher than the 1 month. We were talking about yesterday how the yield curve was about to reinvert. The 10 reinverting the 1 month. It's about there. Just hasn't quite happened yet. Looking over at the commodities board, we've got gold is selling off a little bit once again. It's been a rough couple of days for gold. $2,895 for spot gold. That's off by about $20 or 0.68% lower after a pretty big sell-off yesterday. But gold was kind of due for a sell-off, guys. It's been hovering near all-time highs for a while. It's made several new all-time highs this year. I'm not terribly surprised to see a pullback. Spot silver is along for the ride this morning, $31.60. That's down by another 15 cents or about 0.5%. Meanwhile, we've got copper is higher by 2%. Put a pin in that. There's a story out of Chile that may be driving copper higher, as well as some talk of copper tariffs came up yesterday. Platinum, meanwhile, is higher by 0.9%. Palladium is pretty much unchanged, down about 50 cents here. Crude oil, meanwhile, $69.08. We've got WTI crude is back below that 70 threshold for April futures, up by about 15 cents or 0.2% this morning. Now, we were talking about copper. I just want to talk about this one possibly affecting the copper market this morning. Chile power outage plunges capital into darkness and hits major copper mines. A massive power outage across Chile plunged the country's capital, Santiago, into darkness on Tuesday and knocked out electricity to major copper mines in the country's north, buffeting global metal markets. Hours after the outage began and as darkness fell, Chile's government announced a state of emergency and established a curfew from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. from the northern region of Arica to the southern region of Los Lagos. Now, Chile produces about 23% of the world's copper, so that's probably contributing a little bit to the higher prices this morning. Also, yesterday, President Trump asked the Department of Gobbledygook to review the possibility of putting tariffs on copper as well, indicating that copper might be targeted. So those two stories combined probably contributing to this 2% move higher in the metal this morning. Looking over at Bitcoin, it is lower again this morning, still within the band of where it was trading yesterday, but it is at the low end here. 86,463 as priced on Coinbase. That's showing as about $2,000 lower, pretty much right around the lows of yesterday. It's been a rough couple of days for Bitcoin. You're still seeing a liquidity drain. Also, it's worth noting, guys, we broke out below some important levels. We took out that low from back in January. We took out the low from early February. And now it looks like we took out this prior resistance level as well. So the next support level, honestly, I wouldn't look for support here. If we keep breaking down here, we're probably heading back to the high 60s. Only that 200-day moving average is really the big technical level that is standing between here and there. So it's been a rough couple of days for Bitcoin. All right, let's talk about Supermicro now, guys, because unlike people who just read headlines and then spout off and run their mouths, you actually got to read these reports and actually look what's in it. And I know nobody does this, but, well, we're going to go ahead and do this anyway. Hang on one second, guys. Just got to make sure something isn't blowing up on me. No, it's not. Okay. This is the statement directly from the 10K and Supermicro report of independent registered public accounting firm. BDO is saying we have audited the accompanying consolidated balance sheet of Supermicro Computer as of June 30th, 2024, blah, blah, blah. The important thing, in our opinion, the consolidated financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the company at June 30th, 2024, and the results of its operations and its cash flows for the year then ended in conformity with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States. BDO is signing off. That's the big takeaway here, and that's all the market needed for this stock to go rip higher. Everybody stops reading as soon as they get to this. I keep reading. I can't help myself. So when I keep reading, I come across things like this. The consent of independent registered public accountants, where they say right before their final sign-off, our report on the effectiveness of internal controls over financial reporting expresses an adverse opinion on the effectiveness of the company's internal controls over financial reporting as of June 30th, 2024. So shortly after signing off and saying, yeah, this is all totally in acceptance with generally accepted accounting principles, no problem signing our reputation, they go on to say, yeah, these guys don't know what the hell they're doing. They have no internal controls. So how do these two statements occupy the same report? I found that highly unusual. It's not unheard of. I mean, there are audits where they say, hey, we've got an adverse opinion on the effectiveness of internal controls, and they still sign off on the statements. But this isn't the only negative statement in this report. So we're going to read on a little bit. This one right here, this is from page 14 of the 10K. Supermicro themselves says, we have identified material weakness in our internal controls over financial reporting, which could, if not remedied or remediated, adversely impact our ability to report our financial results and the results of operations in a timely and accurate manner. Gee, you think after filing your annual report about 6 months late, you think maybe you've got some weaknesses? But this part here gets crazy. Management identified certain material weaknesses in our internal controls over financial reporting. Those weaknesses included IT controls for certain IT systems that were not appropriately identified. Controls to address segregation of duties conflicts were not properly designed or appropriately implemented. In other words, people were allowed to independently review their own work or naturally find them no wrongdoing. Let's see, controls over the completeness and accuracy of information produced by the entity impacting multiple financial statement areas were not properly documented. Maybe they weren't properly documented because they didn't exist. All of this, which could lead to financial misstatements and affect our ability to report our information on a timely basis. And then the most important thing, we have not remediated any of those material weaknesses. Guys, they're listing all of these problems with their accounting, and they're saying we didn't fix anything. And the auditor is saying these guys have no controls over their internal accounting. And after all of that is said, they rubber stamp this 10K and they say, yep, we're signing off on the financials, no problem. They can't guarantee the accuracy of anything, but they're signing it. And of course, that's all the market needs, right? Supermicro computer stock up 19%. It was up 24%. I would not be surprised to see the market come to its senses and watch these gains evaporate over the course of the trading day. Because other than BDO signing off on the financials, which apparently is enough for everybody to just go ahead, take my money, even though there's still crooks, the stock just rips on that news. Now, it's also worth pointing this one out from last August. U.S. regulator finds unacceptable deficiency rate at auditing firms. You guys are never going to guess which auditing firm had the highest deficiency rate. You'll never guess. Put it in the comments if you think you can tell where I'm going with this one from back in August. Qui custodiet ipsos custodes. That is the Latin for who will guard the guards or who will watch the watchman. If, in the U.S. audit industry, that would be the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, and it does not like what it sees. The PCAOB called out an unacceptable level of deficiencies at the country's biggest auditors alongside the release of its latest inspection results on Thursday. The PCAOB, which has the power to review the audit of any U.S.-listed company, performed 287 checks of audits carried out by the 6 largest accounting firms in the country, as well as a smattering of inspections of smaller auditors' works. And here's what the findings showed. The PCAOB found deficiencies in 46% of audits last year, up from 40% in 2022. Deficiencies occur when an auditor fails to collect enough evidence to support part or all of their conclusions. Just want to emphasize that. A deficiency is when they don't have enough evidence to support their conclusions. Now look at this part. Among the 6 largest firms, 86% of audits carried out by BDO were found to contain deficiencies. Deficiencies being where they failed to collect enough evidence to support their conclusion. 86% of audits. That means the BDO audits were good by exception. They were almost universally bad. The next worst was Grant Thornton with a 54% deficiency rate. The so-called Big Four account auditors, they fared better with 38% of audits at Ernst & Young containing deficiencies, 26 at KPMG, 21 at Deloitte, and 18 at PwC. So look, you're looking at an average of about 26% deficiencies among the Big Four. BDO's was 86%. Guys, this firm is a joke. This is just an audit shop. You pay them enough money and they'll sign off on your books. 86% deficiency rate. And then you wonder how all of this crap could be in a report and yet they would still sign off on the financials after all of that "we dare you to sign it" language was found in there. But hey, that's enough to send the stock higher. Congratulations, Supermicro bros. You're making a ton of money off of fraud. Good luck to you. Let's move on to the GOP. House GOP narrowly advances budget resolution, a crucial step toward delivering Trump's agenda. It's a political win for Trump, guys. But if you actually read what's in it, it kind of sucks. With a push from President Trump, House Republicans sent the GOP budget blueprint to passage Tuesday, a step toward delivering his big, beautiful bill with $4.5 trillion in tax breaks and $2 trillion in spending cuts, despite a wall of opposition from Democrats. Now, guys, the $4.5 trillion in tax cuts, that is not additional tax cuts. That is just a continuation of the tax code as it currently stands. It was set to expire this year. And so the $4.5 trillion in tax cuts is just not raising your taxes. The vote was 217 to 215 with one Republican, Tom Massey, and all Democrats opposed, and the outcome was in jeopardy until the gavel. The Senate is expected to make several changes to it, but it's probably going to pass in the Senate. Now, shout out to Frog Capital, who sent a couple of screen grabs to this one this morning. Here's what the projections are for the budget in the years going forward. First things first, under deficits, they are projecting a $2,081,821,000,000 deficit for this fiscal year. Guys, all the talk about spending cuts from Republicans, they are calling for a $2 trillion deficit this year, their first year in power. Also, $1.8 trillion next year, 1.7 after that, and then 1.9 in 2028. They're going to keep running $1 to $2 trillion deficits forever. This has to stop. You guys, Republicans, you campaigned on cutting this. This is not a cut. Also, they're talking about what's here by 2032, the total national debt will pass 50 trillion by the end of fiscal 2032. It'll be $51.3 trillion. I just want to say that again, guys. We are on pace to nearly break $50 trillion in the national debt by the end of this decade. And I would mention all of these projections don't include the possibility of a recession, because during a recession, tax revenues go down and budget outlays go up, which means deficits get bigger in recessions, which means we're probably going to break 50 trillion long before 2030, according to the language that's in this bill. Also, a couple of important things. It is the goal of this concurrent resolution to reduce mandatory spending by $2 trillion over the budget window. Let me just mention that, guys. It is the goal to reduce spending. You see that goal there? Oh, we're very mission-oriented in Congress. Congratulations. They're not cutting spending. They just hope to cut spending. They're giving the homework to the budgets. A lot of what you're hearing, you're going to see a lot of statements in the press about how, this slashes the social safety net, and they're making cuts to Medicare, and they want to throw grandma off the cliff. And then Republicans are saying, we're not cutting Medicare. The word Medicare doesn't appear anywhere in the bill. Guess what? They're both right. Because what this bill does is they go to whatever committee in Congress that has oversight over Medicare, and they say, go find me $800 billion worth of cuts. Well, the only program that committee manages that's possibly big enough to develop a cut that big is Medicare. But of course, they're not going to do that because they're not willing to touch Medicare, because they're afraid of the Democrats saying they want to throw grandma and poor people off the cliff. They yank on heartstrings, and Republicans are spineless and will never follow through on spending cuts. So at the end of the day, guys, nothing is going to happen here. Look, we're 36 trillion in debt and we're on pace for 50 trillion in debt by the end of this decade. You cannot cut spending by that much without hurting people. It's got to happen because we're hurting people by not cutting this spending. The reason why the average person can no longer afford their former standard of living is because of the inflation that is being caused by runaway spending in Washington. All of this pain, all of this hardship that you have felt since the beginning of this decade is directly the result of the runaway spending in Congress. And it's not because taxes aren't high enough. All right. The federal government could pass a bill tomorrow that says seize every bank account in America, 100% of all the money in the bank in America, take it all, and it would not be enough to pay off the national debt. We literally owe more money than all the dollars in the world. It ain't about taxes. It's about spending. You got to cut the spending. Yes, it's going to hurt. Let's be grown-ups and not pretend like breaking a spending addiction isn't going to be painful. You were voted in to do it anyway. Do it anyway. All right. China to inject at least $55 billion of fresh capital into several big banks. Oh boy, the bailouts of the banks in China have begun. They're kind of small, $55 billion. I mean, hey, by American bank bailout standards, these are very small. But of course, China always badmouths how the United States bailed out the banks, and then they go and bail out their banks the second things get difficult. Amazing how that works. China plans to start recapitalizing 3 of their biggest banks in the coming months, according to who? People familiar with the matter, following through on a broad stimulus package unveiled last year to shore up the struggling economy. Authorities are looking to inject at least 400 billion yuan, that's 55 billion bucks, of fresh capital into the first batch of Agriculture Bank of China, Bank of Communications, Postal Savings Bank of China, said the people asking not to be identified. The plan, which could be completed as soon as the end of June, is subject to change, and the amount for each bank is still being finalized. Now, it doesn't look like this is necessarily money printing. They're talking about issuing special sovereign bonds to pay for this capital injection. And unless the PBOC is going to be buying those bonds, it's not going to be QE. So it looks like they're going to be borrowing from the bond market, basically socializing the losses of the banks from their real estate collapse onto the burden of their taxpayers and their government debt. I mean, they're taking a cue right out of the U.S. here. These numbers are going to get bigger. China's real estate collapse is ongoing. It's now spread to China's consumer market. You're seeing all kinds of slowdowns in China. So I expect to see these numbers. We'll see more numbers, and they'll get bigger as they come in. Lowe's beats Wall Street expectations as it starts to break out of sales slump. This is very similar to what we saw from Home Depot yesterday. Lowe's topped Wall Street quarterly earnings and revenue expectations on Wednesday and said its sales could see modest growth in the year ahead. The company said it expects full-year total sales to range from $83.5 to $84.5 billion, which on the upper end would be higher than its total revenue of $83.67 for 2024. They expect comps to be flat to up 1% year over year for 2024 as well, or 2025, I'm sorry. Comparable sales for the quarter rose 0.2%, just barely positive, and also worth pointing out with the inflation rate of 3%, that means real sales are actually down by 2.8%, 2.8% less stuff selling on average. But this is a positive number. This was boosted by online gains, high single-digit growth among home professionals, and sales related to rebuilding efforts after Hurricane Milton and Helene. And I remember Home Depot said yesterday that Milton and Helene were responsible for most of the same-store sales growth that they were seeing. So I think this is a one-off from the hurricane effect here. That slightly positive metric ended 8 consecutive quarters of comparable sales declines. It also exceeded Wall Street's expectations. Analysts had anticipated a fall of 1.8% in comps. Lowe's stock right now is doing pretty well. The opening bell has rung. It is currently up 4.15%, trading at $252, up about $9.50 this morning. And I think we're going to cut it off there, guys. I just want to say thank you very much to Mr. Alex L., who says 10K, 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 number go up. Honestly, guys, you could have taken a dump on a piece of paper, smeared it around, and then written 10K on it. And this market would have seen it and said, you know what, buy the stock. They filed their 10K. Nobody, and I mean nobody, cared what was in it. As soon as they saw that BDO sign off, they stopped reading and they left. Guys, that if you actually read that 10K, There is just page after page after page of OMFG. This company is so fraudulent. They're explicitly saying we have no control over our numbers. We can't guarantee they're not fake, and we have no plan to fix them. But BDO signed off. That's all they care about. BDO, the auditor, with the 86% deficiency rate in their audits. Who will guard the guards? Thank you very much, Alex. I agree, sir. Thank you for supporting the channel. Cuban Enforcer, thank you, sir, for the super chat. Says 5 million golden visa to pay off the national debt. I did see that story. Mish and I were talking about this morning. President Trump is offering the $5 million America Gold Card. Basically, buy your way into the United States for $5 million. Sure. I mean, hey, people paying us to come here for a change instead of people breaking the law, wandering in here with a gallon of water and the clothes on their back, and then us spending money to put them up in hotels and give them a prepaid phone and give them money to eat and give them money for everything else. Sure. Why not reverse the flow of capital and citizenship? I'm all for it. Why not? Imagine that. Imagine actually making money off of immigration instead of just bleeding capital. What a thought. Thank you very much, Cuban Enforcer, sir, for the super chat. And Nashville Pasta Man, SMCI hired Georgia with the dark glasses from Big Short. Georgia, the lady from S&P. I remember that scene from The Big Short. Yep. A little bit of use of metaphor by the makers of that movie. We're making all the same stupid mistakes we made last time, Pasta Man. I mean, that's what they're doing. Like, I'm amazed that they could say all of these internal controls could have resulted in fraudulent misstatements, and we have not remedied them. And yet BDO comes in and says, yep, sure, no problem, this passes. When a company straight up says we've had no control over who said what in our financials, amazing. But again, it makes sense when you look at an 86% deficiency rate of their audits, according to the auditor of the auditors. Now it makes perfect sense why Supermicro chose BDO, because BDO is the worst. BDO is just a chop shop that will sign off on your books for money. And all I can say is paging Mr. Anderson, Mr. Arthur Anderson. You have a phone call at the front desk. Thank you very much, Pasta Man, for supporting the channel. And thank you, Max Fit, for the super chat, sir. The super, what do you call them? The stickers don't show up on StreamYard, but I appreciate the support of the channel nonetheless, sir. You are a gentleman and a scholar. Chuck G, what's going on, Charles? He says, how much did SMCI pay BDO under the table to sign off on it? That's a good question. Maybe it was CompuWare and Ablecom that actually paid them, because remember, when you've got unrelated third-party or undisclosed third-party transactions, you can hide your losses on the books of Ablecom and CompuWare, two companies that are run by Charles Lang's brothers. Charles Lang is shareholders in those companies, and those companies operate out of the same building as Supermicro Computer. I wonder, did BDO look really that close? Also, BDO, I should mention here, guys, BDO mentioned two CAMs, like I forget what it's called, basically critical accounting matters, kind of like findings in their audits. One of them was revenue recognition. BDO said it is very difficult for us to actually audit the accuracy of when and how they're recognizing revenue, which is significant considering Supermicro has a history of channel stuffing, and they had to settle with the SEC for that back just a few years ago. And they also had a critical audit matter associated with their inventory and how they are writing down their inventory. And honestly, the math and the accounting jargon that went into that, a lot of that went over my head. But there were some significant findings, but those significant findings didn't stop them from signing off on the books. And so that's all anybody cares about. BDO signed off on the books, even though BDO, apparently their word is worth nothing. Company still got SEC probes. They still got DOJ probes out against them. So maybe the regulators and maybe the financial cops will actually hold them accountable. You'll forgive me if I am not optimistic that they will, because fraud is so common now. We just accept it. Everybody just accepts it's the way things are. This whole freaking bubble is propped up by fraud. It's so obvious to anybody who's looking. And unfortunately, people are making a ton of money off of it while assuring everybody that the people questioning them are lunatics, and the people who are too busy to actually pay attention to any of this are the ones who are going to be the most hurt by it when their retirement plans go up in smoke when this bubble bursts. And it's kind of what I'm trying to stop here. But you know what? 10K with some poop on the paper, that's enough. Number go up. Congratulations, bros. And thank you, Charles G., for supporting the channel. And thank you, everybody, for having your coffee with the Melon Heads this morning. Watch those NVIDIA earnings after the bell. My gut tells me they're going to be good. They'll be asked about DeepSeek, but they will probably dismiss it. It's just a little too early for DeepSeek to show up in the numbers. Thank you guys for the super chats. Thank you to my magnanimous Melon Heads on Patreon and YouTube. You guys rock. Links down below should you feel so inclined. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Love you guys. Don't forget that like button and that subscribe button on the way out. Until next time, live small and dream big.